You are watching Breakthrough News, and this is the Freedom Side. I am one of your hosts, Eugene Puryear, here as always, alongside my intrepid co-host, Rania Khalek. Rania, great to be back alongside you.
Great to be back alongside you, Eugene.
Thank you. Thank you for that salute. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Glad the hierarchies are being recognized here on Breakthrough News. Uh,
No, I take it back. That was not I was just being respectful.
well, we'll circle back around to this off air to make sure that we're appropriately hierarchical. Um, Nonetheless, obviously a lot going on in the world as is pretty much par for the course these days, and we've got a great show covering a lot of different things. I will just remind you that we're always covering a lot of different things here, so this would be a great time if you're watching on YouTube to go ahead and hit subscribe and then go ahead and hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things you subscribe to. And you want to just double check and make sure that your notifications are on so that you are making sure you don't have to look hard or really do anything at all to be alerted on a regular basis about all the great content that is coming out here on Breakthrough News, including Dispatches with Rania Khalek. A great episode actually just dropped recently in relationship to the ongoing situation in Iran. So definitely check that out and go back through the archives. A lot of great stuff there, very relevant to things that are going on now. So hit the bell so you get the alerts for the things you subscribe to and make sure your notifications are on. And if you're watching us on Free Speech TV, just shout out to you and keep watching on FSTV. And a big shout out to that whole team there for making it possible for us to appear on that platform. Rania, are there other things you would like our viewers to be aware of?
Yeah, Eugene, I just want to give a shout out to health. I
Okay.
had a rough week. Well, the
I mean, I know what you're talking about, but
No, there's
let the
nothing like
audience
getting
in. Let them
really
in. Let
yeah.
them in.
Well, there's nothing like getting really sick to like just be so grateful for not being sick. I got some sort of flu earlier this week, which was just absolutely horrific. So sorry to anybody who's like it's like ripping through the population like a wildfire right now. So drink your fluids, guys. Wash your
Yeah.
hands. Don't cough on each other. It's that time of year. Just really happy to feel better. It was a rough week, and I'm happy to be here with you and with our audience. And to that end, I want to remind our audience, Eugene, that in
Mhm.
addition to liking, subscribing, and sharing this episode to help boost us in the algorithm that hates us, you can materially support Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/breakthrough news and becoming a member for as little as $5 a month, though you can always give more. But for that little amount of money, you can access exclusive content as well as exclusive merch. You'll have all of our shows coming into your inbox directly through Patreon. You won't even have to rely on that YouTube algorithm to let you know when we have new content. And most importantly, you'll be helping to support an independent media outlet. In a time where we're facing a tsunami of just nonstop corporate disinformation trying to sell us endless war and death and pedophilia, which we'll be talking about later in the show.
Well, thanks, Rania. I appreciate that. And of course, I'll also just say, since we're getting started here, if you want to let other people know that we are on, we are live, we're moving forward, we would also be grateful for that as well. But let's just jump right into it. And we want to turn to some of the some of many interesting threads coming out of the sort of ongoing surge in Minneapolis around immigration and some of the things that we can take from that as it concerns the uses and abuses of the politics of race here and how it interacts with the broader politics of the working class in the United States. And we are very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Lawrence Grand Prix, who's the Director of Research at Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle. As always, Lawrence, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, great to have you as always. And I wanted to start with something that I think is, as I've been thinking about a lot, as regards what took place in Minnesota and the way it played out, and the sort of targeting of the Somali community around the issue of fraud in and of itself, because this sort of metastasized from just an attack on, the alleged sort of Somali, whatever they're alleging was going on there vis-a-vis fraud, to a major attack on childcare spending and other form of social spending, directly. And it reminded me a little bit of the conversation that has historically been had around blackness and quote unquote welfare, and the way sort of African immigrants were being weaponized to, I think, awaken that similar sort of ideological offensive.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting because we hear so much about universalist policy on the left, helping to make these policies more durable, more people benefit. It makes it shields it from some of the backlash you get from racially specific policy. And I think that what happened in Minnesota is demonstrative because it shows that these racial scripts that we have in America are going to be weaponized in ways that make it so even so-called universalist policy will be coded through the frame of the welfare queen. Even folks that aren't supposed to typically fit within the frame of the welfare queen in terms of the lazy black descendant of Southern slavery who have developed a disdain for work and therefore wants to get by off of benefits. Now it's just extended to the immigrant community. And I think it's a tangible example because not only did they cut money to Minnesota's child care programs, they targeted many blue states for all child care funding, not just those going to minority communities, immigrant communities. They're willing to expend the pain to white working class people in order to deliver the red meat to their base of being seen to put racialized moochers, quote unquote, off the public dime in check. So I think that that really challenges leftist progressive assumptions around the perceived political benefit of universalist policies and means that we have to engage more directly with narratives, specifically for me, around this notion of public dollars going to black and brown people must be corrupt. Because what I fear is that that oftentimes creeps into the language of the left as well, in terms of legitimate critiques of black elected officials in majority black cities or black urban areas that are more neoliberal. I think it becomes too totalizing when we use that narrative of corruption and local black elected officials giving money to hook up their friends. That can easily create like a horseshoe theory between the left and the right. And I fear that we need to be sure to be distinguishing our critiques so that it can't feed into the racialized panic that I believe was part of what happened in Minnesota.
Mm.
And of course, Minnesota is a perfect example of this, but you argue that that's not an isolated incident, as you're basically saying now, but part of this longer history where racial backlash is basically weaponized to dismantle social programs. So I'm curious if you can talk about some that pattern from like welfare reform to public housing to education, where I mean, I guess briefly because we could do just like an entire hour, 2 hours on that, but maybe just kind of like the highlights of that because it's important. I mean, the prism of race and racism has often been used historically speaking, especially over the last, let's say, like 40 years, to dismantle so much of welfare that exists in this country.
I'll speak to an example that I think will be salient to your audience. So the example that comes to me is the concerns as Black voting rights expands into Black power, Black elected officials taking office, and the less spoken about goal of Black power that my organization, Leads of a Beautiful Struggle, tries to extend today is really strategically and effectively using the vote of racialized minorities to do resource redistribution to people serving those communities and how that at times has actually clashed with folks on the left. So one example that comes to mind is Ocean Hill, Brownsville. So as folks may know, there was an attempt in this formerly much more Black, Bedford-Stuyvesant. When you have community control of schools, you have Black folk wanting to basically have control over their schools. They weren't saying fire the white teachers. They were saying, given the unique experiences of Black students in this community, we think it makes sense to reassign, again, unionize, that's important, unionize white teachers to other schools so we can have Black teachers with specific culturally responsive curriculum serve in these schools and also get those jobs. And it was the teachers' unions, oftentimes with very explicit racialized scripts that were very adamantly attacking Black folks' attempt to, again, use local control to get those jobs to Black folks in their communities, specifically because they have a unique need for Black folks serving those communities. I think there's something very similar happening in New York right now. So if you look at Mondani's public safety plan, he is giving more money to people in community doing violence prevention. But there's a concern amongst some of the Black grassroots folk who really built up this crisis management system that Mamdani wants to fund as his Department of Public Safety. That was built up by a lot of Black grassroots agitation during the de Blasio and during the Adams periods. And what people are seeing and what people are fearing is that without an explicit commitment to Black grassroots folk getting that money, you're going to see basically a gentrification of that critical service, where money that had been going to Black folk doing critical, effective work in community goes to large white nonprofits that have connections to the progressive movement and use some progressive rhetoric, but ultimately also have ties to the policing establishment. So I think one example of this briefly is the Center for Justice Innovation. This is one of the folks that is currently getting a lot of money in the current crisis management system that Madani wants to fund more. If you look at their board, one of the people on their board is from Baltimore. We know her well. She's the person who brought the gun trace task force, those folks who were acting like a criminal gang but were cops in Baltimore. She brought them to Baltimore. But worse than that, to conclude, there's a guy that they cite on their website named Thomas Apt. He's sort of one of these academic propagandists that Alex Karakatsanis talks about that explicitly says we should use violence prevention, grassroots folks interrupting violence in community, to get more community support for policing so we can bring back stop and frisk and bring back hotspots policing with more legitimacy. So it's only 2 clicks right now on Mamdani's website from the supposedly radical leftist Department of Public Safety to bring back stop and frisk. And what's going to happen is Black folks are going to be like, y'all are gentrifying this work. And I fear the left is going to say that's identity politics. And that's going to kick in, right? So we have to get ahead of that, because then we can actually listen and build a more effective left if we understand that we have indigenous practices that can be expanded. We don't need to just sort of toss more money at it as the only solution, but we have to engage that unique anxiety. It's hard to believe Adams could have done anything right. Right? Hard to believe he could have been forced into greatness by Black grassroots advocates. But we have to recognize that and not think that we have the solution and we're coming to community like, intellectual saviors that are bringing the knowledge and the good news of leftist politics.
No, I think that's a good point, and I think the point about Adams is well taken in connection to the Ocean View Brownsville struggle, because ultimately, he's a product of a Black political machine politics in Brooklyn that was deeply affected by those moments and those times. And even though obviously he strayed from that for some time, I think it is relevant to the perspectives and the way he views things and looks at things, which in some ways I think, and maybe just to extend the metaphor a little bit, I think the point about Black nationalism and its existence as its own form of, I think you'll see where I'm going with this, its own form of progressive politics, right? I mean, like I was doing some research the other day on Reconstruction, and it's notable to me that, the thing that is most attacked by the anti-Reconstruction forces in terms of the politics is to link it to the Paris Commune, and to say this is like a new form of communism that's going to destroy capitalism in America. Or if you look at the rise of the FBI and the Bureau of Investigation, which is so deeply rooted in the need to suppress the relationship between the Black liberation movement and national liberation movements internationally, of course, especially India, but even, with the labor movement here in the United States, and this, the targeting of Marcus Garvey, the targeting of others, becomes so foundational in the creation of this broader system of political policing. And so maybe the question I'm really asking you is that also historically the left needs to reframe the role of the Black nation in relationship to capitalism and what that means about moving beyond capitalism.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge topic. We'd love to come back and talk more about it. I'll try to have a narrow response. When Minneapolis happened, I heard folks on the left saying, we need to be serious about corruption because otherwise they will weaponize the accusation against us. And I want to say that given the racialized scripts around corruption being so deep, we need to have a more nuanced conversation. So, for example, solutions-based. Erica Ford from New York has an organization called Life Camp that is credited with being one of the critical builders of the crisis management system, the violence prevention system. She has a model called credible clinicians. So you have credible messengers, people who are formerly in gangs, street associations, mediating conflict. What she does, and other folks like her, is extend that to credible clinicians. So it's not just academic public health people doing the trauma-informed care, going out into community, doing the intake. This is not only a critical way to get folks employed, but it's an anti-technocratic, anti-elite frame coming from the Black community. This would seem like exactly what someone like Zoran or other leftists like that would want to build up. But because of the lack of engagement with indigenous Black systems, we're not hearing that. And again, how we deal with the accusation of corruption, when they say you're giving money to people who don't even have degrees, we say, good. We lean into it. We have the debate because we know that the local media, Sinclair media, the right-wing media is going to accuse anything we do as corruption. And the only way we deal with that is to say, what you call corruption, I'm going to call redistribution of resources against your technocratic traditional notions of who deserves money. It doesn't mean you just hook people up. It doesn't mean you give anybody money, but we change the criteria of who we as a community define as deserving money. And again, that should be perfectly aligned with Zoran's legitimate argument that people are using woke language to support technocracy. But we have anti-technocratic populist technologies right in front of us that we're not only not utilizing, we're actually risk undermining because we're not engaging what's coming out of the Black nationalist tradition as possibly being progressive leftist or even more progressive and leftist as coming out of the white leftist tradition.
Hmm.
I mean, it's a really good point. And I guess that would take it to like, what lessons should organizers and lawmakers and maybe people in media draw from all of this? Like, what is the proper way? I know you kind of gave an example. But what is the general proper way, would you say, to sort of defend social programs and then also confront the racial scapegoating at the same time without letting the right set the terms of the debate? And I think it's also important, by the way, I just want to make a note before I let you answer that right now, because you have so much of this like sort of, populist, right? And I put populist in quotes because it's very fake rhetoric on certain issues, right? Like you'll see people on the right being down with like talking about how disgusting Epstein is and how horrible Israel is. But then those same exact figures will do entire episodes of their shows about how African immigrants are ruining the culture of America. So these people who are amassing huge platforms and even attracting some people on the left to them because they're willing to talk a little bit about certain topics are then just like going on this, they say they're anti-woke and anti-identity politics, but actually just going on this white identity politics spree. And anyway, sorry, I'm getting a little off topic, but not really. But I think that's why it's important. Like, how do we confront these narratives in the correct way on the left, would you say?
Yes, it's another big question. Confident political movements are willing to tell the truth. And the truth is that some folks on the right have a point when they say we've just tossed money at these problems. Nothing ever gets better. People are hustling off of that money. The uncomfortable reality is that that money is not going to Black grassroots formations to solve that problem. And I think even folks on the left don't believe that. They think that Black ethnic politics means that folks are handing the money to people within their Black ethnic community networks. There is a multi-billion-dollar industry of largely elite, college-educated, multiracial, but still largely white academic folks who are trained to hustle off the suffering of Black people. And those people have failed tremendously at solving the problems of all working class people, not just Black people. And if not only is it not anti-leftist to say that, we're going to have a nuanced engagement with that reality if we want to defend increasing spending for these social programs. Because there are ways in which the mentality, the pedagogy, the theory of change these programs use is oftentimes very reactionary, very white, very traditional. And we can have better applications of programs to spend, not always to always replace it, but to supplement and to give alternatives that come from the populist culture of working class people, white and Black. And I think that that's an argument that, again, expands the public safety, public spending argument, but grants the reality that we all see we don't want to have to say, don't trust your lying eyes. All the spending is working, because the spending is not working. But we have to give them an answer that's not they're stealing the money.
No, I think that's critically important and a great framing and a lot of big things that we threw at you. So, of course, we'll have to keep coming back and keep hitting them. And we always appreciate you, Lawrence Grand Prix, Director of Research at Leaders for a Beautiful Struggle, of helping us sort through it all, and looking forward to having you back soon.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Rania.
I was talking about Tucker Carlson, if anybody was wondering. No, he did. It's crazy. Like, he'll do this thing where he just like did a whole episode of his show talking to Christians like in Palestine or Israel, whatever, about how they're being treated there. And everybody's like, oh my God, this is so great. And I'm not saying that's not an important topic, but literally just a month ago, he did a whole episode of his show about how, in fact, like Africans, like Somali immigrants, are actually ruining the culture of America. So I'm just like, dude, like, it's like the Steve Bannon thing. Like, on the one hand, you're like, oh, Israel's bad, America first, blah, blah, blah. Like, the oligarchs control everything. On the other hand, you're basically funded by an oligarch and you're talking about how awesome it is ISIS shooting people. Like,
right.
Anyway.
Yeah. No, it should be more obvious, but that's why we're here to enlighten people. Well, we want to keep moving on here in the show, continuing with sort of many things coming out of what's been going on in Minneapolis and the resistance of people to ICE terror there. And we are very, very honored to be joined as we continue the show by Nekima Levy Armstrong, who's a civil rights attorney and activist. Nekima, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. You all know I love breakthrough news. So thank you.
No, well, listen, we appreciate that and appreciate all your support. And, I guess I'll just ask you first and foremost, because obviously I think your name has become more widely known because of the action that you and others took to speak truth to power inside of this church, where I believe the pastor is directly working with ICE. Is what moved you all to take this action? And maybe just to add it a little further, what relationship to the historical traditions of the civil rights movement and the Black liberation movement may have also entered into your decision, those of you who took this step?
Well, I would say that, it's important for me as a woman of faith, as an ordained reverend, and as a preacher to speak the truth. And so finding out that David Easterwood is a pastor at City's Church in St. Paul, Minnesota, as well as the director of the regional ICE office in Minnesota, was simply appalling to me as well as unconscionable. He had been named in a lawsuit that was filed by the ACLU on behalf of 6 Minnesota residents, where they were alleging retaliatory behavior by ICE, because ICE, of course, has been using tear gas and flashbang grenades and rubber bullets against nonviolent peaceful protesters. And so the Friday before this church demonstration happened, he was named in the lawsuit saying that there is no evidence that these ICE officers are violating people's constitutional rights. And as a matter of fact, he said it's these agitators, these protesters, who are the ones who are being aggressive, which couldn't be further from the truth. Like Rebecca Good said, the wife of Renee Good, we have whistles, they have guns. That's the dichotomy that we're talking about here. And so we went to that church in the Christian tradition of raising questions and calling out the hypocrisy of having David Easterwood serving as a pastor and the director of ICE. And what we found from some of the congregants was that many of them were not aware that David Easterwood is the director of ICE. And so during the demonstration, what you see is us chanting, but there's also parishioners and protesters having conversations as the demonstration is going on. There's also people sitting in the pews, worshiping, praising the Lord, praying, or just sitting there watching what's happening. So all of these things are happening simultaneously. But as a Christian, I felt that it's my duty to go into a place like that and raise questions. And so contrary to right-wing talking points, we didn't storm the church. We sat in the pews and participated in the first part of the worship service. We sang with the church. The pastor prayed. And during his prayer, he said, "Dear Lord, please chasten us and help us to get our house in order." And then he finished his prayer and he said, "Amen." And after he prayed, that's when I stood up and I started walking towards the front of the church and I said, "Excuse me, Pastor, did you just pray this particular prayer?" And he said, "Correct." And I said, "Well, help me understand, how is David Easterwood a pastor here and the director of ICE in Minnesota?" And as soon as I started mentioning David Easterwood, the pastor started saying, "Shame, shame," over the pulpit. It was clear to me at that point he didn't want to have this conversation in front of the congregation. So right after that, I led us into a chant, "Justice for Renee Good." And then the other protesters who were there stood up and joined me, where we were located in the church. And then the next chant was, "Hands up, don't shoot." Because we didn't know, at least I didn't know, if there were ICE agents in the church or federal agents. And I wanted them to know our hands are up. We come in peace. But we had a message that needed to be delivered.
Yeah, I mean, in the aftermath of your arrest, federal officials, as you know, and as you alluded to, have framed the protest as this criminal conspiracy. And, they've even used this manipulated imagery in public messaging. How has that experience of surveillance, of targeting, of that sort of narrative manipulation affected you and others in the movement? And what does it say about how dissent is being treated politically right now?
Well, I was quoted in an article that came out by the New York Times earlier this week about the AI image that was released by the White House after my arrest, where they darkened my skin, they exaggerated my features, and they have me looking hysterical, as if I'm, freaking out, I'm panicking, I'm broken, which couldn't have been further from the truth. My real arrest video shows me being cool, calm, and collected in the midst of what I am experiencing, which is government repression and retaliation for speaking out against the injustices that ICE has levied upon our community in the state of Minnesota. And so in that New York Times article that came out talking about the White House's use of AI to manipulate my image, I said, they're supposed to be the greatest superpower in the world. And instead, they acted like a $2 tabloid. That shows us how far this office of the White House has sank. That's something we should all be worried about when they openly lie, when they manipulate the facts, when they condone killings of innocent people. The alarm bells should be ringing everywhere, because it shows that we're continuing to slide towards authoritarianism, tyranny, and fascism. And it also shows the lengths that they will go to punish dissent. This has nothing to do with justice. It has nothing to do with law and order. This is all about political retaliation. If it was about justice, they would have arrested the ICE agents who killed Renee Good. They would have arrested the ICE agents who killed Alex Preddy. But instead, they're roaming free. The ICE agents who killed Alex Preddy, they helped them get out of the state of Minnesota. They put a protective detail around the house of Jonathan Ross, the ICE agent who killed Renee Good. And let us also think about what happens in sanctuaries. They are trying to act as if they care about churches, being a place of sanctity. I care about that as an ordained reverend and as a Christian woman. If they cared, why would Donald Trump roll back protections for churches during his second term? He issued a memo saying that ICE agents can go into churches with warrants and they can arrest people. ICE agents have arrested people in the parking lots of churches, which has had a chilling effect on immigrants, whether they're documented or not, from going to churches on Sundays because they're afraid that ICE will be targeting them. Now, does that sound like an agency, a government that is trying to protect what happens inside of a church and trying to protect people's right to worship? Absolutely not. This is more of their manipulative rhetoric and their twisting of the truth. But I'm here to twist it right back to reality and to call a spade on behalf of our people and on behalf of freedom, justice, democracy, and our Constitution.
Well, and on that point, I want to ask you some about the power of movement. I mean, obviously, things are not over in Minneapolis, and clearly the White House is doing everything they can to continue to accelerate this, I personally would call it terroristic campaign of mass deportation. But that being said, what we've seen in Minneapolis, from the dense network of ICE watchers to the huge demonstrations that we've seen multiple different times to all the smaller pieces that are happening on multiple levels, all nonviolently, I'll add, and the way the nation has really risen in solidarity with Minneapolis, like what we saw last Friday. I think 5 or 6 cities had like 100,000 plus people coming out, 50,000 people, huge things. People are seeing and are like, yeah, we're standing with Minneapolis. And then all of a sudden, in Congress, we got to reform DHS and we're going to do this. And all of a sudden, Trump administration, oh, well, we're going to change how we're doing it. So even if it's somewhat performative, and in many cases directly performative, it does seem to speak to the concept that when people say, well, why protest? Why come out? Like, why do movement? The idea that movement can actually shift, what's happening in the country seems to be playing out here in response to the people of Minneapolis not willing to be cowed and the people around the country saying, we're going to come and have y'all's back.
They need to look at history if they're baffled that protests work. I mean, protests, pushing back against government, violating unjust laws, that's how we got out of slavery. It didn't just happen because people in power suddenly had a conscience. It happened because of ongoing resistance to oppression and government repression. That's how the civil rights movement was able to be successful, pushing back against federal laws, against state laws, against local laws that sought to deny us our rights and our humanity. All of these things have been baked into laws, and it's always been a small group of people who have stood up consistently against government oppression, spoken truth to power, put their lives, livelihoods, and bodies on the line for what they believe in. And the masses are usually sitting on the couch somewhere watching what happens. While again, a small group bringing that soul force, that God energy, that resistance, being those who are on the front lines of defense for everybody else. And what's happening in Minnesota is no different. We have been fighting these battles for a very long time, long before the world took notice after George Floyd was killed in 2020. We started our movement work specifically around police accountability and government accountability in 2014 after Mike Brown was killed in Ferguson. That is when we really got organized. But even before that, you had so many groups that were organizing about different things for many decades in Minnesota. So we were able to build off of those foundations for our movement for police accountability and government accountability. And those are the things we're bringing to the table in this movement against ICE. Because before people saw what happened in Minneapolis, people saw ICE as just an immigration issue that didn't concern them, for the most part. But Minneapolis and Minnesota has helped broaden the scope of what this is really about. This is a fight for our democracy. This is a fight for our humanity. This is a fight for law enforcement accountability, for racial justice, for protecting our Constitution. And you have Black organizers at the forefront, working alongside immigrants' rights groups and other groups, refusing to yield to the Trump administration and holding the line for the rest of the nation. Because we know if we give up and give in, whether it's below zero or whether it's sunny outside, this will open the door to the rest of the country moving more rapidly towards authoritarianism and there being no holds on Trump's power. But we're saying absolutely not. We're not stepping back. We're not stepping aside. We're not stepping down. We're going to move forward in the spirit of those who came before us and fight for the rest of the people in Minnesota and across this nation.
Ooh, you got me fired up. And to that end, I do want to ask you, as we see this movement expanding across the country, what reforms or actions do you think are necessary now to protect civil liberties, to ensure accountability, and prevent agencies like ICE from being used as instruments of political repression? And I know that's a really big question because there's not one answer to it, but what's being asked for right now?
Well, I think that what's being asked is for Congress to do their damn jobs. They are one of the biggest parts of the problem in all of this. They know that Donald Trump is going to test the limits of his political power. He's going to test the limits of our democracy and the Constitution. He showed us that during his first term. But Congress really is the body that is responsible for what is happening with ICE. They created ICE. They funded ICE. They're supposed to have oversight of ICE. And yet Congress, because it is controlled by Republicans, has literally sat down on the job. And then we've had Democrats that have aligned themselves with Republicans, for the sake of making sure there's not a government shutdown. Listen, sometimes you got to shut down. That's just the bottom line, especially when it comes to our human rights and our human dignity and American citizens literally being murdered for peacefully being present and demonstrating, right? And so Congress, I don't even know why they have oversight of ICE at this point if they're refusing to do their job. So that's number one. Congress needs to take control. Number two, Donald Trump needs to be impeached. I mean, how many lies can the man tell? How far can he allow the office to sink before somebody with a conscience makes a decision that this person is unfit to serve as president of the United States? They know what is in the Epstein files. That's a big part of this as well in terms of the distraction. Look over here, don't look over there. As he just disrespected one of the CNN journalists the other day. Where is the outcry for these women and these girls who have been abused, documented abuse, by these rich and powerful, primarily men, related to the Epstein files. That is a part of the inquiries that need to happen, and there needs to be accountability. We can't look away from that because all of this is interrelated. Think about the violence against women that has happened at the hands of ICE, and the fact that most of our elected officials are silent when these things happen. Alex Preddy was protecting a woman when he was killed. Renee Good is a woman, a mother who was needlessly killed. So that is another hidden thread in all of this in terms of the disregard and disrespect towards the lives of women in the special place that we hold in our society. Additionally, we need our Democratic elected officials to grow a backbone or grow a pair, as some might say, because our governor has the power to order investigations by our Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. We don't trust the FBI anyway. So why would we care about them investigating when the state has the ability to hold ICE agents accountable when they violate state laws? And yes, there is a supremacy clause where these cases may have to be moved to federal court, but that still doesn't mean that the state doesn't have jurisdiction that it can't exercise in federal court. The governor can order the state troopers to arrest any ICE agents that violate state laws. They're not doing that. The governor's going on TV, the mayor's going on TV. They're begging the Trump administration to leave. I'm like, they clearly show they don't want to leave. So what are you going to do with the power that you have? If they had arrested Jonathan Ross after he killed Renee Good, Alex Preddy might still be alive. These agents might not continue to get out of control. And the reason that they're not even worse than they are right now is because of the power of the people, using their whistles and using their voices. I saw it firsthand before I was arrested, the night before, when FBI agents, I now know, stormed the hotel that I was staying in, apparently looking for me. And I was in the lobby at the time. I didn't know that they were looking for me because they had me under surveillance. And guess what? There were people there doing karaoke that night where they're supposed to be playing, having fun. Guess what? They had those whistles around their necks. When those federal agents came in, they blew their whistles and they said, "Get out, get out." And I didn't even realize they were protecting me. There were 10, 15, or 20 FBI agents at the time. I just saw these buff men with black shirts storming the lobby, apparently looking for me. And later that night, in the middle of the night, when I was at the hotel, so I had a few friends staying there as well, who had rooms next door to mine, but at one point they came to my room. And in the middle of the night, one of my friends, a black woman, opened the door to my room because she was going to go to her room to take a bag there. As soon as she opened the door to my room and walked out, I was standing behind her. Agents came busting out of the room across the hall from me. They had set up a sting operation for nonviolent, peaceful church protesters. Imagine the amount of resources that went in to them surveilling me, setting up a hotel room across the hall. And once she walked out of the room, they chased her down the hall. They didn't say, "Freeze, what's your name? You're under arrest." They tackled her like she was a football player and like they were football players. And when that happened, I closed the door. The man looked at me and ran after her. And when I closed the door, I said, "I bet they think that she's me." That's the only reason that I could see them tackling a black woman in the hallway. And later, so they take her downstairs to their vehicle, bang her head up as well. So she wound up with the concussion behind all of this, handcuff her, and she's in the vehicle on the way to the Whipple Federal Building. And she asked them to see the arrest warrant. And they show her an arrest warrant with my name on it. So they tried to assault me as a lawyer, as a reverend, as a mother, as a black woman. They tried to assault me. And she told them, "I'm not Nekima." She told them over and over. They didn't listen to her. They took her all the way to the Whipple building. She said, "You guys are going to look like fools." First of all, she's 2 or 3 inches shorter than me. We don't look alike other than being brown-skinned black women. And when they got to the Whipple building, they ran her driver's license. They looked like some damn fools because she wasn't me. And she called and told me they had an arrest warrant with your name. And that's when I called my lawyers. And we actually had tried before this, the day before, to see if they had an arrest warrant for me so I could turn myself in. The hotel that I was staying at was just 8 minutes from the federal courthouse. And the marshal said they didn't have an arrest warrant for me. The lawyer, the DOJ attorneys, the U.S. attorneys said, we'll call you back. He called them back throughout the day. They gave him no information. And then that morning before I was arrested, my lawyer negotiated for me to be able to self-surrender. And they said, yes, that's fine. You can go, that I could go with my lawyer to turn myself in, and the FBI would be following behind. That would be fine. And then David Rosen, the chief prosecutor from Washington, got a call from higher ups who said, no, we need to be the ones to take her in. Acting like I'm Hannibal Lecter, like I'm Magneto, as one of my friends said, and I'm a nonviolent peaceful protester. And so you saw from my, like I said, my arrest video, I'm seeing the foolishness in front of me. I'm cool, calm, and collected. I'm asking them why they're recording me. Oh, it's not going to go on Twitter or anything. We don't want any false narratives out there. And I said, look, do you have a policy that allows you to record me? Because I don't want to be a trophy for MAGA. And you guys see exactly what they did. Use this as propaganda. And they use it to try to scare people to say, this is what happens to you when you speak up against the Trump administration. But my real arrest video says this is what happens to you when you're 10 toes down, standing for the people and not intimidated by their foolishness.
Well, it's been an honor, and it's always great to have you here on Breakthrough News. Nekima Levy Armstrong, we appreciate you, and we appreciate everything you are doing. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I mean, my God, what a free country we live in, huh? That's just wild. All that's wild.
It really is. Well, let's keep moving on here to some other critically important issues, and that's the threat to Haiti, the threat to Haitians here in the United States, the connection between those two different factors. And we are very, very honored to be joined here on the show once again by Dr. Jemima Pierre, who's a professor of global race in the Institute of Race, Gender, Sexuality, and Social Justice at the University of British Columbia, and also a member of the Black Alliance for Peace. As always, Jemima, thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be back.
Well, great to have you.
Under terrible circumstances, but yes.
One day we're going to have you on, and we're going to be celebrating something great. That'll be the day. I want to start here with this sort of gunboat diplomacy that has emerged against Haiti. Obviously, the U.S. bringing the ship there directly to Port-au-Prince. And I'm hoping you can give us some context for that, because I know there's some very relevant events, especially regarding this, I think, upcoming Saturday or Sunday, February 7th, in relationship to the sort of so-called government of Haiti, what the United States wants to see with Haiti, that it feels like this military escalation is a part of.
Yes. One of the things, the first thing is the U.S. is, unlike Biden and Obama, who used gangster policies, who had gangster actions towards Haiti as well. Trump is much more belligerent, right, about it. And so there's been, so I guess the thing to think about is an army ship showed up on the coast of Haiti, as well as 2 Coast Guard cutters. And everyone saw that as a veiled, well, not even a veiled threat, as a threat, because what's happening is that the presidential council that the U.S. government installed 2 years ago, its mandate is coming to an end on Saturday. And the supposed point was to already have an election and a puppet government installed. So, through so-called free and fair elections, right? This is what they use these days, in order for installed so that the U.S. can continue doing what it's doing in terms of its occupation of Haiti. But what happened was that was delayed. That did not happen. So the elections are set supposedly for towards the end of the summer, 2026. But the presidential council was basically trying to figure out a way to have some kind of other transition after its mandate is over, because there's already, a power vacuum coming, right? And so what's happened then is that as the unelected, by the way, none of this is in our Constitution, none of these people are elected, but this council that was installed by the U.S. was trying to figure out a way to do this. They also wanted to remove the prime minister from Haiti, from his position, because they think what the U.S. is planning to do is basically dissolve the council on February 7th when its mandate is over, and keep this prime minister as the sole person in charge of Haiti at the moment.
Hmm.
And for people who don't know, the prime minister is installed, is usually picked by the Haitian president, which was after the coup, after 36 years of dictatorship. The new Haitian constitution said that remove so much power from the president, and basically said the president can assign a prime minister, which is then supported by members of Haiti's parliament. And so this council had put in this acting prime minister since the fall of 2024. And so they wanted to remove him, and the US threatened them. If they removed them, they said they literally threatened physical violence on Twitter, because this is how we conduct diplomacy these days, violent threats on Twitter. But Wooster, who's the ambassador to Haiti, threatened the installed puppet government against removing him. And so they still tried to do it. Five of the members of the 9-member presidential council voted against this prime minister, voted to vote him out. The US sanctioned them in that. And basically are demanding that. So once they sent the ship over there, everyone know, and then military planes are landing in Haiti. Remember, Haiti has no sovereignty, and that's what I want people to know. Military planes are landing in Haiti. Heavily armed soldiers are in Haiti. And so people think that they're basically threatening these council members with some kind of force of violence if they don't do as the U.S. does and basically leave this prime minister in place so that he can take over when the mandate is done.
Oh gosh, what a 2026 we've had so far. But of course, none of this is new for Haiti. This is part of an ongoing escalation, and we can go back to that. But I wanted to ask you something that's happening more domestically in the U.S. with regard to Haitian immigrants, and that is Trump's attempt to terminate temporary protected status for Haitian immigrants. And I believe recently a federal judge has blocked his latest attempt, but this is part of an ongoing pattern. So can you tell our audience, why was TPS, temporary protected status, created in the first place for Haitians? And what would its termination have meant for Haitian families living in the U.S.?
Well, temporary status is for Haitians, for people fleeing difficult, violent, violence and difficult situations from their home countries. And it was put on, I think, is it for by Biden? It was put on to basically allow a few Haitians to come in. I think it's about 350,000 that have temporary status, to prevent them from being deported into Haiti, a place that's considered, high alert violence and so on, right? And so that's what it was. But we have to remember, people don't leave their homes because they want to. People leave their homes because they're pushed out. And it's U.S. policy in Haiti that actually has created this Haiti as this has allowed the failed state, or created Haiti as a failed state, and dumped a lot of guns and arms in Haiti, and made it seem as if Haiti's problem is a problem of gangs, right? As opposed to a problem of U.S. imperialism for the past 22 years, and Haiti being under the control of UN U.S. occupation. And so, but anyways, back to TPS, it was created for that. And a lot of Haitians are under there, especially Ohio. I don't know if you remember, both J.D. Vance and Trump were basically using Haitians, racism against Haitians, saying that they eat dogs and so on and so forth during the run for the presidency, and during the campaign. And so the vitriol, the really anti-Black racism that we see from the Trump administration in particular, if we think about the way they talk about Somali migrants and Somali U.S. citizens of Somali descent in Minnesota, it's similar to that. And so part of that is just this really brutal racism that we see from the Trump administration. And so I also think that they want to remove Haitians from Ohio, which actually the Haitian presence there actually brought about a renaissance of this moribund areas in Ohio that didn't have people working, that didn't have a lot of businesses. The Haitians are there. So that's what's happening. And so they're trying to, Stephen Miller's plan is to basically get rid, him himself being a child of immigrants, but to get rid of all non-white immigrants and to maybe bring some people from Switzerland and white South Africans to the U.S. And so that's what that's about. But people cannot see that separate from what's going on in Haiti and what's happened to Haiti for the past 22 years, which is an occupation. The other thing I want to say is I do think ICE was ready to go to Ohio to start going after Haitians. And part of that is to actually take away some of the heat that ICE is getting for killing white Americans, right? And so it's easier to go in and target non-white people so that it takes the heat from the heat from that, because you wouldn't get as much outrage if you're killing a bunch of black and brown people than you do killing white people.
No, I think that's such a great point. And I mean, the long history of blaming Haitians for so many things. I mean, whether you're talking about the HIV/AIDS epidemic,
Right.
so many, it's been such a theme throughout history. And I think the point you're making about the occupation is so true in terms of the conditions that are driving people here. And I wanted to dig a little bit deeper into that, because obviously, and we've talked a lot on this show, the whole sort of all the problem in Haiti is gangs and gang violence. And I unfortunately was not able to double check this source before I came on air, but I actually saw someone make a point that the majority of people being killed in Haiti are coming from this network of mercenaries, which is run by Eric Prince, this so-called multinational security force with the Kenyan troops, the Haitian National Police. So I don't know if that exact majority statistic is right, but I know for an absolute fact, I've seen many very gruesome videos and photos. And I feel like that's just never reported, that there's this reign of terror that has Eric Prince at the center of it being waged against Haitian people. And like, that is the biggest gang.
Exactly. We have normalized this conversation around gang violence in Haiti as if that is what's always been the issue in Haiti, as if Haitians are inherently violent, as if Haitians cannot control themselves and rule themselves. And we've completely forgotten the fact that Haiti has been under UN occupations since the US airlifted, removed our presidents. If we're outraged about what happened in Venezuela to President Maduro, we also have to be outraged that in 2004, the first person the other president that was removed by the U.S. when the Marines went to his house, put him on a plane and flew him to Africa was Jean-Bertrand Aristide. So we have to remember that. But ever since then, the U.S. basically installed its own a prime minister that had not lived in Haiti for 30 years, brought him in and killed a bunch of Aristide's supporters and installed a puppet government. The U.S. and the UN has been running Haiti since then. And I have to keep saying this because the UN mandate for the BNU office, the UN office in Haiti, was just renewed last week with unanimous votes, even from Russia and China, which is surprising to me, right? And so all of this has happened. There was not this kind of violence in 2004. And so the UN office has been in Haiti since 2004. And nothing has happened except a deterioration of that. And so what I don't want us to do is normalize this armed political vacuum, because in this vacuum, the CPT, the Presidential Council, was installed by the US. They handpicked 9 people from Haiti. They got CARICOM and especially Mia Motley to basically push to install this fake government and tell them that the only way that they can be in this fake government if they allow a foreign military intervention into Haiti by these forces. And so then they paid Kenyans some money, right? And then brought in this force, this so-called gang suppression force, a multinational mission back in 2024. And then they turned that mission into a 5,500 member gang suppression force. And then this fake government contracted a 10-year contract with Eric Prince of Blackwater to basically go into Haiti with no oversight and kill people. And you're absolutely right. People are saying, you have the mainstream media, every time they talk about Haiti in a vacuum as if it's a gang problem. And they'll throw out numbers. UN's own numbers are saying, well, 5,000 people were killed, in gang violence last year, when it's true. Like Jake Johnson of the CEPR will tell you that a large majority of those are summary executions by the violent Haitian police and Eric Prince drones going into these poor neighborhoods and basically killing people. When you see these bodies and you're like, what are they doing to these bodies? They're mutilated, right? And so now, because the majority of the Haitian population are young people, you can just go into a poor neighborhood, kill a whole bunch of young people and just say, oh, they're members of gangs. And that's what we've always said, that you cannot just send force into a political vacuum and then say that the problem is the gangs, but it's the vacuum that you created, and it's the U.S. sending the arms, the military, the force, and the fact that Eric Prince is able to walk around Haiti, send his drones, there have been little girls, little boys killed by these drones. There was a birthday party where a drone went in and killed a whole bunch of people. And so that's what we have to think about. We have to ask ourselves, why is it when it comes to Haiti, the first solution is always violence, and we forget everything else that the U.S. is doing? Why is it that there's a genocide in Gaza, but nobody's sending a military force to stop the genocide, but you have a violence that is instigated by the U.S. in a political vacuum created by the U.S., but then you're sending more military to kill more people. So it's just really frustrating because, and I'm glad you're talking about it, but it is frustrating because people forget we've normalized this armed political value, and we make this exception as if it's a norm, and that's not the norm. The norm is to have people in control of their governments, of their country. But what we have is a complete control of the U.S. of Haiti by the U.S. and everyone else going along with it, from the UN Security Office to the UN Council to the OAS to the CARICOM and all the governments around, including Mexico, Panama, that are participating in this racket. It's really frustrating and it's really problematic. And I do think the left in the U.S. need to really take a look at themselves and see what it is that we're doing that's allowing this kind of action towards Haitians to keep going.
Well,
Yeah,
oh,
I mean,
sorry.
I just want to ask one thing. I guess, as we watch the U.S. really kind of have a spasm of massive amounts of violence across the Caribbean and Latin America. I mean, as you've been describing the history, Haiti has often been the testing ground for so much of this, punitive and dehumanizing approach of imperialism, more so than any other country across the region. So kind of like stepping back, how do you fit this into the broader ramped up aggression we're witnessing from this administration across the board to what they see as their backyard?
No, we can see it. You can see that this operation, whatever they're calling it, where they're just killing people in the Caribbean, where they've completely taken over Venezuelan oil. They've taken the president of Venezuela. This is, remember, before the coup d'etat in 2004, there was a coup d'etat against Hugo Chavez in 2002, and that failed, And so this is a continuation. People don't, the U.S. empire does not stop. They just continue. What they want a Libya or a Syria situation. What they want is they said this. There was a tweet that said the U.S. wants like controllable disorder, right? So they want a mess. They don't want anything else. And I do think the military ships that showed up on the coast of Haiti is for Haiti, but I also think it's a calculation against Cuba. And I think people need to actually think about this, because one of the things, Haiti is very close to Cuba. It's right near it's on the Windward Passage. And I always say this, the U.S. has always wanted a military base in the northern west part of Haiti because it's so close. And because the Haitian government would not allow it over the 200 years, it ended up with Guantanamo Bay. But that tells you how close those two countries are in that area is. And so we actually, if people stop exceptionalizing Haiti and see it as one node of all the places that the U.S. is trying to use to control, to go after Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, to get rid of any kind of leftism that's left in the region, then if we stop exceptionalizing Haiti, we see this as just one more step in U.S. Establishing full control. It already controls these other, Caribbean states like Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago, which basically opened up their airspaces and allowed the U.S. to use them. And Guyana in particular, Irfan Ali was very much part of this setting up this fake government that they put in Haiti in the U.S. So the U.S. is able to use a lot of people in the region, but at the same time, it's killing people left and right, and nobody's saying anything. And, people also don't even, there's been Haitians killed on boats on the coast of Haiti. Nobody's talking about that, but it's part of this same process. And I always say this, if we exceptionalize Haiti to our detriment, because if we did not exceptionalize Haiti, we would have seen when they removed Aristide in 2004, put him on a plane and flew him out of the country, that this would come back to haunt us in the region. And it's going to keep happening. We actually have to remember that and see what's happening in Haiti is what they want everywhere else. They want the same for Venezuela. They want the same for Cuba. They want controlled chaos. That's what they want. And they want the chaos, and they don't want any strong state. They don't want any strong government. And what's happened in Haiti in terms of the destruction of the entire state, we have no elected officials, nothing. We have a bunch of gangsters from the US are the gangsters, a bunch of pedophiles running Haiti, right? And so we have that. And so that's what they want for the region, because that's the kind of control they want.
Just to ask one final question here, and I think it speaks to this point to build on it, is, I've always felt that there is a deep fear of Haitian political culture in the elites in the United States because of the nature of it. I mean, we mentioned President Aristide, which I think people forget, who was a reference for progressive people around the world. I mean, much less the hemisphere at the time. And, having been on the ground in Haiti and talked to people, when you talk to people about what they want to see, it certainly is a vision of great beauty in terms of what the country could be and what it has been and all the different possibilities that are there. And it feels to me that there is that fear and that threat that Haitian sovereignty is not just sovereignty in the general sense, but it's also very much the center, as it has been since the Haitian Revolution, of the possibility of sort of a hemispheric and maybe even African diaspora-wide politic that speaks in a powerful way against capitalism, against imperialism in different senses. And I've always felt that was so key to why the US wants to keep Haiti down. Like, obviously they're making a lot of money, but it feels like to me it almost goes a little bit beyond that, to their sort of historic fear of the Haitian people and what they've constantly brought to the forefront.
That's exactly it. I always say this. I think part of it is the U.S. always goes back, and you see this in the WikiLeaks papers, and say their mistake was to allow democratic elections after the coup d'état, after the demise of the military government, the dictatorship of Duvalier in Haiti in 1987. And they thought they controlled the elections, and Aristide surprised them and won in 1989, 1990. And they said that they would never allow this kind of democratic process again. And so all these things that are doing are basically trying to prevent Haitians from ruling themselves. And there's something unique about Haiti. And, we talk about Trump holding grudges. White people hold grudges. The French, the Americans, the British are still holding a grudge from the beating they got from the Haitian enslaved Africans in 1804. And one of the things that, the former foreign minister of Canada explicitly said, and this shows up, there's a video of him saying this, when they took over Haiti in 2004, they basically said, is sovereignty something that Haiti needs? That was a question that they had when they were discussing how to remove Haiti in 2003 at the Ottawa Initiative on Haiti. They had this, he said this on video, that is sovereignty something that Haiti deserves, Haiti needs, or is sovereignty something that's the same for people everywhere? And you see that when you look at the histories of Haiti, when you look at the 1915 occupation, when you look at, Haiti was a member of the League of Nations, a founding member of the League of Nations while it was under occupation, because it's his sovereignty has never been recognized by the West. And so Haiti really plays that. And so when we see what's happening in Haiti, people don't want to see it because people exceptionalize Haiti, but it is actually the center of that kind of deployment of U.S. kind of ideological as well as political and military force in order to exert itself. But there is something about Haiti that I think they cannot bring themselves to allow us to be sovereign, or not allow us to reclaim or to keep our sovereignty. And they're going to continue to do that. And Haitians know that, and I think at the right time, something will happen, because it cannot go on like this. It's been 22 years of occupation. And I actually think, there's a change on the way.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Dr. Jemima Pierre, as always, thank you so much for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thanks so much for having me.
Mm-hmm. Rania?
Well, I mean, I'm glad that we could cover the fact that the U.S. has now sent warships to surround Haiti. I mean, it's just completely insane, the gunboat diplomacy era that we're back in right now. Everything's just insane violence everywhere. And I mean, I know we're going to cover a few things here, Eugene, before we wrap. And there's a lot of that is that imperial violence. I mean, one place where the crosshairs are right now is Cuba. And it's just completely insane what's taken place. The U.S. is essentially using blackmail and coercion to intensify its blockade of Cuba at the moment. The U.S. is, already has this economic blockade on Cuba. It's had it for decades. It's ramped it up in the last decade to get, where it's even worse, and Cuba struggles to have, electricity all day. And now you have the White House just this week issuing this official statement declaring a national emergency in the U.S. because it claims, and I quote, the policies, practices, and actions of the government of Cuba constitute an unusual and extraordinary threat, which has its source in whole or in substantial part outside of the U.S. to the national security and foreign policy of the United States. That's crazy. That's actually insane. It accuses Cuba of aligning itself with hostile countries, terrorist groups, and malign actors adverse to the U.S., which the White House considers to include Russia, China, Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah. And of course, this is trying to make the case that Cuba is this national security threat. And essentially, they're trying to cut Cuba off from any and all ability to access oil. They literally when you cut a country off from energy like that, you are saying you want to create mass death. We already know that sanctions create mass death. But this is even worse. I mean, countries need fuel to fuel their hospitals, to fuel their water sanitation plants. They need oil to make their cars run, to move food around the country so people can eat. I mean, it's essentially a death sentence what the U.S. is trying to do to Cuba right now. It's completely outrageous. And you have Trump making claims that Cuba's not going to last past 2026.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's clear what they're trying to do. I think your point is correct. They want to create mass death. They want to do everything possible to essentially say to the Cuban people, the only way that you will not be strangled to death is for you to try to overthrow your government and do whatever the United States would like to see. And I agree with you. It's it's shocking that they would say that Cuba is a threat to the United States. I mean, I think many people might be familiar here with the terrible crisis of diabetes that afflicts so many people and disproportionately affects Black Americans, who are 40% more likely to die due to diabetes. Well, Cuba actually has a drug that could make a huge impact on the amputation of limbs. I mean, perhaps even, really make it so you don't have to constantly amputate people's limbs who have diabetes, which is a major issue and a lot of what the default becomes here in the United States, but it can't enter the market correctly because of the blockade. Cuba has lung cancer vaccines and many other types of medicines they want to bring into the US market that could tremendously help people in many different ways. They can't bring that in due to that. Cuba actually wants to trade with the United States in many different ways. They, over the years, have often said that they want to buy certain US farm goods and bring in different other things that would actually help enrich the people of the United States, create jobs, and help our small farmers in our rural areas that are under the gun of US-based agribusiness that, by the way, is trying to destroy all small farming and the heritage of small farming, especially Black farmers here in the United States. And Cuba wants to actually help those people who are now being destroyed by Trump's tariffs that have ravaged the agricultural sector in this country, the so-called heartland that he claims to speak so much about over the 250 years. Cuba would like to have more cooperation on sports between the United States and Cuba. They would like to have more tourism coming from the United States and Cuba. They'd like to have academic exchanges between the United States and Cuba. They'd like to just act as a country that is 90 miles away from the United States and have free and open relationships. But since the Cuban Revolution, the United States has completely refused to do so. It is not Cuba who does not want to work with the United States. The United States has decided that they will only work with Cuba if Cuba destroys its own nation. Because why did the Cuban Revolution happen? Because the United States had turned Cuba into an economic colony, which they used and abused and extracted billions of dollars from, turned thousands and thousands of people into prostitutes, had a gambling dens that were run by the mafia, who, by the way, were working with the US government. And that's why the mafia and the CIA and that criminal network has always been majorly a part of this attempt to destroy and strangle Cuba. So more allusions to our present day with how criminals are interlinked with the intelligence services. I mean, it's completely absurd on every single level that a country that just wants to provide healthcare, housing, jobs, employment, education to all of its people in an equitable way, that has inspired people in every corner of the globe, that has used, its limited resources to train tens of thousands of doctors, that has a medical system so good that the Italians brought them in during COVID-19, that this country is being declared a threat. And it says, this is what it comes down to. The US government, which is run by big business, thinks anything is a threat that doesn't want to make sure that a tiny elite of people can be super enriched at the expense of everyone else. They want to have mass poverty. They want to have working class people unable to make it. No matter what JD Vance and these other idiots say that they care about working class people, they do not. None of their policies reflect that they care about that. And they target governments like Cuba because those are governments that have empowered their working class and their rural peasantry to take over the government and to direct things in a way that doesn't allow, the Gambino crime family or whatever to come in and exploit its own people alongside the major American sugar and liquor companies as well. So completely and totally absurd. It's disgusting. I mean, it really, there's very few policies that are this bad from the U.S. government. It's a policy, as you said, of mass death, Rania.
It is a policy of mass death. And just to be clear, this is part of an executive order that Trump, what I was reading from was an executive order that Trump issued this week. And that executive order, what's so dangerous about it is that Trump is basically threatening to place tariffs on any country that sells oil to Cuba. And this is the death sentence right here, because Cuba, I could be wrong, so correct me if I'm wrong, but Cuba produces about 30% of its energy needs, and the rest has to be imported because it's not exactly like an oil producing country. It's this tiny island in the Caribbean that you said is 90 miles away from Florida. And so if you cut this island off from its ability to import oil, you are sentencing many, many people to death. So, I mean, you're basically saying you either surrender and you can have fuel or you die. It's blackmail. And it should be framed that way in the media. But of course, the media in the US, because it's a corporate media that's all run by the ruling capitalist class that wants Cuba's destruction for being a socialist country, that class of people frame Cuba's problems as all these like self-inflicted wounds because of socialist mismanagement. And if only they would enact, private reform or privatization reforms in Havana so that their country can prosper, everything would be great. But because they don't, they're evil and they must be destroyed. And that's the narrative we get. And it's just an insane narrative. Both of us have been to Cuba. It's a lovely country run by socialists, people who want, and actually, you know what? It doesn't even matter because Cuba should be able to have whatever economic system Cuba wants to have. It's not up to the US. But for the past 60 plus years, the US has been trying to destroy this revolution, this socialist project. And up until now, it has failed. But it stands to be seen what happens next. This is a story that we're going to continue to follow. Stay tuned to Dispatches. I have a great guest coming up to talk about what's going on in Cuba in the coming days. But if you don't mind, Eugene, I just want to kind of connect this to what we were talking about earlier with Haiti, in addition to what we've been talking about on all of our programs about Venezuela, what we've been talking about Iran. U.S. empire right now is really desperate to maintain its dominance around the world. It feels like it's under some sort of threat. You have imperialism, in a state of crisis, capitalism in a state of crisis. There's reasons for that. But as a result, this isn't just a Trump phenomenon. It's U.S. empire acting out, trying to control everything in the most vicious and violent way possible. And that's why you also see, in addition to, kidnapping the sitting president of Venezuela, in addition to trying to completely strangle Cuba, threatening Mexico and every other country across Latin America, you also have this escalation of war threats against Iran. And so we're waiting every single day to see, is Trump going to bomb Iran? I personally think, based on what many people much smarter than I am are saying, plus my own understanding of regional events, is the U.S. is on a path to bombing Iran. It's a bit delayed right now because of these talks. But in these talks that we're seeing, that there's going to be talks between the U.S. and the Iranians tomorrow in Oman, that almost collapsed yesterday, but then didn't. And there seemed to be some leaks taking place to try to sabotage the other side or the narrative. But regardless, the U.S. is operating from a space of, we want 100% capitulation or we're going to destroy you. And so the Iranians are in a spot where if they don't 100% capitulate, they're going to probably face the wrath of a US bombing campaign. And if they do capitulate, they'll probably still get bombed because that's a situation where, the world is in right now. And so, the US is saying we want zero enrichment. We want Iran to shut down their ballistic weapons program. We want Iran to stop, partnering with what the US calls proxy groups across the region, what Iran calls its partners across the region. Basically, the US wants Iran to get rid of its every single deterrent capacity it has to US empire. And we've seen, this attempt to inflate, the death toll from the protests that took place recently, which there absolutely was a high death toll from those protests. But, these outrageous numbers that we've covered on the show, 30,000, 40,000, 80,000, have no evidence behind them. But trying to inflate those numbers to use every justification possible to lay the foundation for a war on Iran. Though despite all that, this is still an incredibly unpopular policy among the populace in the US. It stands to be seen what happens. But Eugene, I think at some point very, very soon, it's inevitable there will be another confrontation that the US will absolutely provoke with Iran.
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right. And I think you're very correct to point out that the pretexts are just that, they're pretexts. They hate Iran. They want to destroy Iran because, it's amazing that they're like, this is over the nuclear weapons. Well, they don't even have nuclear weapons, but the allegation that they're developing nuclear weapons, because the last time the US bombed Iran, Trump said that they had completely destroyed it. So why do they need to do anything now if they completely destroyed it? So that proves that either A, that's not true, or B, it's just a pretext, or C, that it's both not true and a pretext. And just to go even further, when Trump became president the first time, Iran had already agreed to a deal of extremely intrusive inspections, in that basically they were just like, we're going to turn over the whole thing. You can come whenever you want. There's video cameras everywhere. Like all of these things they agreed to say, like, we are not developing a nuclear weapon here. And Trump ripped it up. So again, it goes to the point that you're making, Rania, that this is just a pretext. It's not really about nuclear weapons or nuclear energy per se. It's about the fact that they just want Iran to be a weak country because Iran has not, signed up for the sort of US hegemonic reality in the region. And I think that part of this is also, the way that sort of, they always say about things about quote unquote dual use technology when they're talking about sanctions with Russia, but I do think that's a big part of what's happening with Iran, that they want to crush Iranian science and technology. I mean, it is true that Iran has a lot of economic problems, but they have very extensive, very developed science and technology. Like, so when you think about like ballistic missiles, well, it's basically the same technology, more or less, that you use to shoot satellites into space. And Iran is one of the few countries that can shoot satellites into space. And shooting satellites into space is, I think, pretty obvious to people why that's an important technology for our modern era and how you can develop independent things. They have all sorts of different pieces from a medical perspective. Someone will have to fact check me on this, but I feel like I read about this last year, that there's now work between Iran and Indonesia about how to do the surgeries where you're not, I forget the exact name now, the remote surgeries and all these different things, and nano robots and development of carbon technologies that can help overcome imports in the oil and gas industry. And I could go on and on about this. And I think, there's a deeper conversation about how you can have advanced science and technology and economic problems that is aside here. But the basic point I'm making is not only is Iran not signing up to the US hegemonic role in the region, but it's developed its country in such a way that it can actually help facilitate a different sort of vision. Like that when the supreme leader met with whoever it was from Saudi Arabia who came over there relatively recently, and he said, we can share with you some of our technologies or whatever it may be, some of our gifts, I think he called them. I mean, some people took that to be weaponry, but I actually took that to mean advanced science and technology that could help Saudi Arabia carry out Vision 2030, because they have none of that infrastructure, because that's the Faustian bargain that's put on countries that agree to be a part of the US infrastructure in West Asia, so-called Middle East, North Africa, is, you can get rich off of oil, but you can't do anything else. And you have to 100% be behind our political agenda. Iran's been a against the political agenda. They've developed their economy in such a way that it actually can be a challenge to U.S. hegemony in the region, that it can offer other countries in the region the possibilities of moving from under the aegis of the U.S. and Europe and developing their own capabilities. And when you put all those things together, it's tremendously dangerous from the point of view of the United States and its adjuncts like Israel, whose entire goal is to maintain imperial control over the crossroads of the world and one of the most significant energy infrastructures, especially for the countries in Asia that the U.S. is trying to contain. So, I think when you look at all of it, I mean, I hope that Trump does not bomb Iran. I hope that they can come to some sort of agreement here. But I agree with you, Rania. I think that as it looks now, it seems like it's really just a matter of time. And the same way with Venezuela was that like kind of long lead up and you never knew what was going to happen. And then they made their move, that this is a similar situation.
Yeah, I'm really worried we're just going to wake up one day and it's going to be like, oh, the U.S. is bombing Iran. And of course, like that has ramifications across the region. I recommend people go check out the interview we did last week with Hala Jabir. She kind of broke down how things might play out in places like Lebanon or Yemen and Iraq. Eugene, before we wrap here, I do want to touch on one more topic that has been in the news the last few days, and that is this recent leak of more Epstein files, these emails. We can go into specifics. I don't necessarily like have a bunch of specifics in front of me. It's just more confirmation of just how widespread this network of pedophilia was, how many people were enabling it. Sadly, one of them apparently being Noam Chomsky. I mean, we can go into that. We don't have to go into that. But that's been quite the disappointment as well. And I know that's got the internet on fire right now. But I just kind of wanted to take a broader look of this and get your thoughts on this because, every time there's these new Epstein revelations, people do act shocked like, this is some grotesque exception, right? This like freak scandal that has slipped through the cracks. And they're right to act shocked. It's shocking. It's disgusting. But it's also, not that shocking in a way. And I'll explain what I mean by that because I really do view this as a window into how the ruling class operates. Because, a child sex trafficking ring that also functioned as some sort of intelligence gathering and like blackmail operation, it doesn't exist on the margins of power. It exists inside power. This existed inside power. And it existed because powerful people needed leverage over other powerful people. And also they knew they'd be protected. And I think we correctly understand pedophilia to be one of the most horrific crimes imaginable. I mean, just the sexual violation of children, right? Like the most vulnerable population is absolutely disgusting. It's like beyond the pale, right? But I do want to point out that this same ruling elite that has enabled and protected and participated in Epstein's child sex trafficking network is also the same ruling elite that very comfortably oversees a system that kills masses of children every single day. And I'm talking, children in Gaza, children in Iraq. They did it to children in Vietnam. They charged masses of children with sanctions, and they kill them with airstrikes. They literally erase children and justify it as collateral damage as a part of some sort of strategic foreign policy. And that's not to even mention the amount of children who die because of straight up US-led capitalism. From the exploitation of the resources of the global South that leave hundreds of millions of people, if not billions of people, living in abject poverty. And dying at very, very young ages. The same elite that rules over that system is the same elite that was a part of the sex trafficking ring. And I mean, if you're killing children as a matter of policy that's been accepted as just like the default, if you sit on boards and run governments and manage this disgusting imperialist system that treats children's deaths as these acceptable costs for profit, then of course you're going to be totally fine either violating children's bodies or accepting the fact that your close associates are violating children's bodies. Like you don't suddenly grow a conscience when the violence is behind closed doors instead of this more broadened imperial violence that's just so normalized. And this is what I think people have a hard time connecting. That's why I wanted to make this point, because I just want to, I can't say this enough. Like a ruling class that sees children as disposable in war will see them as disposable literally everywhere. an elite that can justify the mass murder of kids abroad has already crossed every moral red line there is. So no, it's actually not surprising that the same people would run cover for or protect a child sex trafficking and blackmail operation. That's actually not a contradiction. That is the logic of power. And I think we should be just as outraged by the children they murder around the world as we are by the children they trafficked and abused behind closed doors, because it comes from the same place. It's enforced by the same system. It's protected by the same people. A ruling class that's fine with killing children will always be fine with abusing them. So Epstein did not exist outside of that system. He existed inside of it. He was a part of it. And I think we really need to absorb that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say a few things. I mean, I think we shouldn't be surprised because I think something that almost everyone knows in the United States, the richer and more well-connected you are, the easier it is to get away with crimes of all sorts, right? Like if you just said to any person, if a millionaire who is deeply politically connected kills someone in a drunk driving crash, and just an average everyday person hits someone in a drunk driving crash, like, is one of those persons more or less likely to get more lenient treatment or get off? I think almost every person in the United States would say, yeah, of course that millionaire has like way more opportunity to get off, right? Like this is actually how the country works, because in the context of capitalism, every life is disposable, quite frankly. Like, I mean, as long as it's seen in a relative sense through the logic of sort of profit making, which goes beyond just like direct profit making, but to the protection of the profit making centers, having more money, having more resources, and being more politically connected will always help you in terms of it. Maybe not in all cases, it might not totally insulate you, but it's always going to be a factor that will help you evade justice through the criminal legal system. And I think everyone who is honest with themselves knows that's true about society. And in fact, it's often one of the major themes of every show about law and order. See what I did there, I guess? And policing in the country, like every single one of them, every season is always going to have some theme about how someone did this horrible crime and it's going to be hard to catch them because they're rich, right? Like it is actually one of the most fundamental things. And sometimes people want to tell these lies and delusions. And I think it goes to the point of the media as well, that like the media won't report it like this. You know what I'm saying? The media will always report these things as these sort of individual things that are happening, blah, blah, blah. And that helps go towards, making it harder to make the connections. But I also just want to make a second point here, and one that's in relationship actually to our last point about Iran, is, the Epstein situation cannot be separated away from his own rise. Like people say, how is this guy so powerful? Well, if you look at the arc of his career, he moves into the sort of higher levels of finance because he was detailed to be a part of the deeper finance around Iran-Contra and the BCCI scandal and all these other banks that were being used to launder money for CIA intelligence operations that had crossover with intelligence operations of other countries, that had crossover with the politics of oil and and oil money and how that was moving from the Middle East or sort of West Asia into the US economy and all these different pieces. So he was not some just random person who came out of nowhere, but he was someone who was deeply embedded in these nodes of how intelligence and economic power and governmental policy come together, and was able to develop a network of individuals that, allowed him to do favors for different people, make different things happen for different people, to become a connector of different people in many different ways. And because of that, made himself into an indispensable enough figure that many people who wanted to protect him, whether or not they were directly involved in the crimes he was committing. Some of them obviously were, and I think these are the questions that a lot of people are rightfully arguing. We need to get to the bottom of how, things might not have been followed up on, might not have been prosecuted. But even for those who weren't participating, it was still important to have the relationship with him because he was a node for geopolitical power that could help them maneuver and do things they wanted to do to enrich themselves and to advance their careers and all these other things. So in that context, to your point, all other people in relationship to him are disposable. And it might be lamentable what's happening, but like this guy is helping me out here, there, and everywhere. So I'm just going to look the other way. And that network of people. And I just want to close by saying another reason it shouldn't be surprising is this is, I hate to say it, but kind of par for the course for US imperialism, that in the post-World War II era, and we could go back beyond that, but let's just say this, has often engaged in and embraced criminal networks to push forward their own policies. And we mentioned with Cuba, and again, this, I think we can make these connections between Cuba, Iran, and the Epstein thing if we really want to put empire at the center of our discussion, that they did use the mafia. They did use the mafia, who was very angry at what had happened in Cuba because, you know, the Cuban Revolution had made it impossible for them to stop their money. But this goes even back to World War II, where they started working with the mafia during the invasion of Italy because they wanted to prevent communists coming to power in Italy, because the communists were the center of the opposition to Mussolini and the Nazi rule of Italy. They were controlling a lot of the territory. After 1943, they become a big part. So the U.S. actually makes a relationship with mafia families and people like Lucky Luciano to establish their own networks inside of Italy that would make it possible for them to do what they needed to do to defeat Mussolini, but also to create a buffer against communism in many different ways. And they gave many favors to the mafia around crimes because of that. They redeploy these same people in these same networks in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. And of course, so much of this has come out over the years. So I'm not just talking like it's 100% true, but you know, the mafia was committing many very terrible crimes against people as well. And you don't have to go into that. We know all about that. And anyway, I don't want to go into that. Everyone knows what the mafia is and what they were doing and all these terrible things. And the government was willing to basically look the other way on a lot of that until ultimately they didn't need them anymore. They create RICO and they start going after these mafia families. But the empire is so immoral that it knows it needs to move in the dark. And if you need to move in the dark and do immoral things, you need other people who move in the dark and do immoral things. And they frequently have at the center of their nodes of imperial backroom, dark room dealing, criminals. And so ultimately we have to recognize, I think to your point, Rania, that it's the system of imperialism that is so immoral that it really shouldn't shock us that every, 15 years we learn about some new deeply immoral aspect of how they were operating.
It's just completely insane, And like the Israel connection is absolutely there, but so are a lot of other connections. And it's just like, again, people who are okay with killing kids are also okay with raping them. That's just the way it is. That's just the way it is. On that note, Eugene, I want to remind our audience that Breakthrough News is an independent media outlet that is not funded by criminals who are a part of imperialism. Therefore, we do rely on support from our viewers. So please consider becoming a member of Breakthrough News by going to patreon.com/Breakthrough News, where you can help support an independent media outlet that is telling the truth and that is bringing you the reality on the ground from the movement, from the places that are being bombed, that are in the crosshairs, and that is pushing back against imperialist propaganda that is trying to drag us all to hell. Support Breakthrough News, oppose hell.
What a great slogan. We need a t-shirt with that. Well, on that note, we will go ahead and end the show. For myself, for Rania, for our whole Breakthrough News team, thanks to all our guests. Thanks to everyone for watching. We will see you next time.